Okay, in reviewing some of your problem and argument templates, I'd like to show you just one example and provide some general feedback as we finish assignments 1 and 2 for week 1, and as you finish up your own problem and argument template, consider some of the feedback here that I'd like to share with you here over the next few minutes. Alright, I'm going to show you one example here, starting first with the argument, and I'd like to show you that I'd like to show you how this argument has been presented in an outline form, and it has very specific applied linguistic key concepts that I think most of us can relate to when we look at any type of problem related to language in the classroom. So if we look at these, we have vocabulary, common language, fluency, intonation and accents, and variation. So all of these are good concepts that I think most of us can relate to in applied linguistics or any of your other linguistic courses that you've taken in the past. Now, this particular example, one thing that I would recommend and again, try to reflect on your own problem and argument template and ask yourself if you are doing the same, making sure that the argument aligns with the problem. So if we look at this particular problem, we have the lack of using authentic material inside the classroom obstructs students' ability to understand and produce English language in the daily life context. So I think the problem that's stated here and the argument separately are good ways of looking at each. They have a good problem and she has a good argument. But the question I have is it aligned? That is the argument really addressing some of the key concepts in the problem? And one thing I would recommend is looking at the argument and building some of the key concepts, maybe shifting some of these key concepts to relate more specifically to the problem as far as authentic material. So, for example, I don't see a lot of information here on authentic and non-authentic material, which really, the entire argument would be related to some aspect of authentic and non-authentic material. Remember, when you're forming an argument, you want to create first an argument, then a counter-argument, then a follow-up. And if we're taking the concept authentic material, then perhaps if we're advocating that authentic material is better than non-authentic material, then our argument would be authentic material. The counter-argument would be non-authentic material, where we discuss the advantages and disadvantages and what it means and how it's used. Think of the question words. And then the follow-up then would return us back to the argument, the original argument, the reasons for using authentic material. And basically it's answering the counter-argument. So here I just want to draw your attention to this example. Again, it's a good use of argument, stating key concepts. In this particular case, just making sure that these key concepts are directly related to the problem and some of the key terms that are presented in the problem itself. Now, one thing, too, that I would like to draw your attention to in this particular problem at the very end, they mention in daily life context. Also ask yourself the scope of your research. Where are you going to be collecting your data? I would assume most of you are going to be collecting your data in the classroom. So in this case, instead of perhaps looking at the usage of English in a daily context, perhaps we want to limit that to classroom, since probably most of us are only going to collect data that is in our classroom. If we're going to look at English use in daily life of our English language learners, that would mean then we're following learners around to their homes and we're basically recording virtually every aspect of their life to see how they're using the English language. So if we scroll down here, we have a conclusion and research questions. Here's some good research questions. I think in this particular case the first two questions would be enough. Remember, anywhere from 1 to 3 research questions are fine for the purpose of the study. We certainly don't need more, and I think in most cases we could limit it to maybe 1 or 2 good research questions, but they do need to be specific enough and again also link to the argument and problem. So again, in this case we want to have research questions that relate to authentic material, which this first one does, and as the second one does as well. So this is a good example in looking at key concepts, specifically authentic material. And the only change I would recommend would be the argument, and maybe perhaps looking at some of these key concepts, making sure that there's tie into authentic material. And it looks like some of these concepts there is some tie into authentic material, but you might want to first divide up the first section into the authentic material and then some of these key concepts, non-authentic material, some of these key concepts, and then go back to our follow-up and return back to some of these concepts. So I just wanted to share one example with you and stress the importance of looking at the problem, the argument, and the research questions, and making sure that each of those three align. That is, that they all address the same thing, the same topic, and it is specific enough that it basically speaks to the technique or the strategy or the activity that you wish to implement as you address this problem, as you try to implement something new, to try to either solve the problem, or perhaps not solve the problem, but at least understand the problem better. So at the end of the day, the idea here is once you align the problem and argument and research questions, and you conduct your research, which essentially is sets out to answer your research questions, we want to better understand the problem. So hopefully at the end of this project you will better understand the problem and hopefully find some ways to address this problem and allow you to improve as an English language educator.